And I was there with Paul and my wife Chris at the Brussels train station. I walked out, beautiful sunny day, and I walked across, something glimmered in my eye. And I walked over and there was a coin on the ground. So I walked over and picked up the coin. What was I holding? An Australian 10-cent piece. I'm thinking, blimey, I'm onto something here. So I took that as a positive thing, that Europe's going to be nice to me. Now there was a slide here we were going to put in about I'll do this one first and I'll come back. We went through and met with different groups. So Europen is a group that's an industry association, a bit like APCO in some regards, with brands are associated with them. The European Commission, we met with them previous day. And the reason we met with Europen is because the European Commission said to the Europen people, you've got to speak to the Australians. That's how we got the meeting. So we thought. And the reason we got it, now, Angela, Tim Tams, you're now with Harvey. Is someone here from Campbell's? Yeah. So we took along a pack of Tim Tams. And because we did a prep assessment of the tray and the film as we're staying there, and they got to eat the Tim Tams. So that might have been the reason. So thanks for those Tim Tams. That was the thing. So we went along and we met with these people. We went with GS1 because GS1's got this standard for the things. We had a chat with them and they're going to be helping us out with some of the things we're doing over here. And then we went to a place, went across to Germany, and we went to in Hamburg. So Brooke and I met. Where did you been before that? You went to Scotland and then you came back and then we went...
Sweden.
Sweden. Oh, that's right. Everybody. Okay. And we went up and at Solpack. And at Solpack, we took along some pieces of packaging from the PETA Awards. Now, the PETA Awards are the awards that are given to packaging people in Australia with the Australian Institute of Packaging. So it's an annual awards program. Now, the PETA Awards, we took along some samples in our packaging and had a demonstration in Hamburg about what Australians are doing and New Zealanders are doing in terms of designing packaging. And these are the winners of the PETA Awards. So the Germans were blown away. I mean, I was asking people in Germany about when you think of Australia, what do you think of? And it's the Barrier Reef, it's the Opera House, it's all these things, it's a destination. But at the end of the presentation that Brooke made and then I made after that, people were saying, why can't we have an APCO? Because they were blown away with what we're doing here in Australia, which is fantastic. So that's the sort of thing when you talk to the German as a nation, you think about Australia as a destination, that's one. But when you flip them and they're now thinking about Australia actually doing some really progressive things and some fantastic things, you walk away with a really good feeling because what we're doing here is fantastic. And it's because of the people in the room here are doing what you're doing. You're making decisions in your businesses. You've gone beyond the if to the why or the how, not the why. You've gone if I'm going to do this or why am I going to do this into how I'm going to do this. And that's the hardest thing. But as Brooke was saying, sometimes the how you're going to do this is the hardest part. But at least we're ahead here in Australia. We're moving ahead. And some of the other nations are trying to work out, how do I do this? And we're showing the way. Some of the takeaways from the trip. When it comes to source separation at curbside, Germany's always done it this way. At the curbside, they have a bin for glass and a bin for paper and a bin for this and a bin for that. It's not quite Tokyo, but it's a really good system, a clean stream. Now, to them, that's the normal thing. Now, in Australia, there's been various conversations at local government level about whether there should be an extra bin at curbside in Australia. But then the question is, should it be a bin for the glass or should it be a bin for the paper? Because the paper people will fight the glass people and they'll say, it should be glass. No, it should be paper. It should be glass. It should be paper. Well, what should it be? I'm not too sure, but I think we should have that conversation as we go forward. The reusable bottle program is also a very formal program in Germany. So when you buy a bottle of soft drink and you take that back, that bottle is not recycled, it is washed and reused. So when you pick up a bottle, there's sometimes a bit of a scratch mark on the side of the bottle. That's no big deal because that's what the normal system is. So in terms of reuse, that is a very formalised historical program that's the way it is. So when we're talking about reuse, recyclable, compostable by 2025, we've got a lot of things we can draw out straight away. If anyone wants to go down the path of reusable, it's there ready to go as a method. Tax incentives for using recycled content. I think France has already got it, and I think that in the process, the UK are going through a consultation for a number of things in terms of changing their legislative framework. One of the things is to bring in a tax on virgin materials to provide greater parity with recycled content. In terms of now, we had a meeting this morning looking at the national packaging targets, and there's sometimes the case where there's parity anyway in terms of virgin versus recycled content. So I'll be interested to see how that rolls out going forward in terms of either providing an incentive or a disincentive to encourage the use of recycled content. Another point there is design guides. Europe is very good at producing design guides. So they've got a design guide here. So with the PREPs being set up in the UK, and they went to a group called the Confederation of Paper Industries. And they said, can you give us something, because we have nothing from the paper industry about what we should tell brands about what's recyclable. So they come up with this document in January this year called the Paper and Board Packaging Recyclability Guidelines. Great name for a guide. Now, this is the first time we've really had a document that's come from the paper industry. But at least now we've got some things coming through, which is fantastic. Different context, they're separating cartons at curbside, whereas in Australia we have all commingling of cartons and liquid paper board and so on. So there's differences here, but there's also, they've still got MRFs, they've still got paper mills, they've still got downstream processes. So we can learn from that. Then you go to Brussels and you speak to a group called CP, which is the Confederation of European Paper Industries, and they're part of a group called the European Packaging Recycling Council. You're getting twice of me, aren't you, in the volume? That's okay. The interesting thing about this is, when you look at the organisations that are in Europe, they're organised... Oh, by the way, do you like my glasses? I just wanted to check. I'm just doing a quick survey. These glasses are made from 100% recycled plastic. There you go. But in, for instance, Europe, you've got the Alliance of Beverage Cartons and Environment. You've got the Confederation of European Paper Industries. You've got the International Confederation of Paper and Board Converters. You've got the European Moulded Fibre Association. You've got the European Tissue Symposium. You've got the European Envelope Manufacturers Association, International Association of De-inking Industry, International Federation of Printing and Allied Industries, European Adhesive Tape Association, European Printing Association, a sector of CP, Worldwide Association of Self-Adhesive Labels and Related Products, and European Association Promotion of UV and EB Curing on Paper. They are industry associations that meet weekly or daily or whatever it is. It's incredible. So when it comes to then guides and information, there's a lot available. So we're trying to sort of bring that in here to help us with Australia. Okay, the PREP. So if you don't know what the PREP is, it's really cool. It's a tool that simulates that. Curbside, in a truck, in a MRF, downstream processes. And if you're a member of APCO, use it. If you don't, who's a member? Okay, here we go. Who's a member of APCO that's not using PREP? Okay, oh, okay. Is it 10 push-ups or 20 push-ups? All right, we'll see if we can get you on board here. We've got a couple of minutes. The reason why we have this whole program is because there's confusion, not just by the consumer, but also the packaging designer. Is packaging recyclable? So if you're making your packaging or making selections about substrate and size and shape, you are confused. And that leads to contamination. But that's what the Australasian Recycling Label is for, because James is now very happy because he knows exactly what to do when he gets to curbside. So the PREP is for the education of the packaging designers. Now, there's a new version coming out, PREP 5.0. What this has is a few new bells and whistles, thanks to APCO. So in the past, it was an accurate tool. We've got the Technical Advisory Committee who are maintaining the balance there to ensure it maintains as accurate as possible to reflect the Australian and New Zealand marketplace. But now we've got bells and whistles. Yes, Alex? We do. So we've got a dashboard. So what the dashboard will do will track all your projects and tell you what percentage of those are recyclable and not recyclable. There's also you can also put product categories in. So for instance, you might cluster some of your products as confectionery or frozen goods or whatever, so you can do a bit of a sort of your projects. We're integrating the Australasian Recycling Label artwork into the PREP, because previously you had ticks and crosses and the marketing department got confused. I'm not even going to go at marketing people, I'm just saying. It's not that hard, but still, that's going to make it better. Enhanced monitoring features for APCO, so in terms of looking through the whole process of who's using it, how we're going against the 2025 targets, that'll help as well. And there's also some technical changes in there that have come from the the Technical Advisory Committee over the last few months in terms of inks and different polymers and so on that cause problems. So there's the technical aspects and there's also the functional aspects. So what I'll do now is I'll just open this up.
A couple of things. Firstly, with the single-use plastics, what are some of the alternatives that we're seeing in those markets that that you mentioned? So wrap in the UK. What are we seeing from some of the retailers and industry players over there that use those items? And compostable and bioplastics, what role are they playing? And then soft plastics as well, I suppose, maybe to Anthony for the Germany piece, like how big of a role or how big of an issue is it over there, and what are those markets doing around soft plastic?
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the single-use plastic, I mean, the work that RAP have done so far and the consultation and their list is very similar to the list that we've got, and everybody, globally has. They're pretty much the same culprits. It's been looked at from a product basis, so your straws and your stirrers and all that kind of standard stuff. And so we've taken some of that, but that's kind of that's given us a little bit of a flavour for the work that we're doing right now in developing our paper around definitions and a problematic and unnecessary list as well. And we've taken not only looking at from a product perspective, but also a material perspective to give more depth to that, because the product is one part of the issue and it's part of the solution, but understanding the materiality of that as well. And in terms of the soft plastics, the C-Flex, that was actually, it was really beneficial to, and thank you to Richard. I think Richard's here somewhere from Amcor, and to Jackie from Nestle as well for helping us get in touch with the right people in C-Flex and make that connection, because they're actually doing some really impressive work around guidelines for soft plastics and how that's all going to come together in terms of a circular economic approach for soft plastics. And we actually reconnected with them when we've been back in Australia, much like the Zero Scotland piece of work as well, and have followed up with that. And I think Jane and Lily had a really comprehensive conversation, and we got a very impressive package back from C-Flex, and we're going to work going forward with them on those guidelines, so that's something that we can also use here in Australia. So that's one of those ones where we've picked up something that they're much more advanced on than us in that piece of work, and we'll leverage that as well. But perhaps you can speak a little bit more about the...
Yeah, with a couple of things there. With the UK, they've got a store drop-off program for flexibles, but it's only polyethylene. So in Australia, we've got the Red Cycle program that you can put laminates on up to a degree. So theirs will be a cleaner stream if they do it, but I think it'll be a lower volume collected compared to Australia in terms of the quality. So that's one thing. But I think also we met last week with the group in the US, MRFF, which is MRFs for the Future, and they're doing a similar thing to what Ceflex is doing in Europe. And I think that whilst there is a lot of work being done, as Brooke was saying, on the guidance side in terms of providing guidance, I still think they're battling on both fronts in terms of tackling soft plastics for the MRFs, and this was spoken about this morning as well in the discussion around there's soft plastics causing so many problems at MRFs in terms of tangling and so on. And I think they're just sort of just putting their hands up and saying it's all too hard. And it's all very well to put extra near-infrared cameras all over the place and trying to separate it out of the paper stream, but it might even reach the paper stream. It may have caught up in the cogs and the MRF even before you get to the paper stream. So I think that there's some solutions being put, but there's sort of one part of the supply chain as a solution. But if the previous points don't even get you there in the first place, it's a bit futile. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done on flexibles.
They're probably more advanced in their application of compostables and biodegradable, but I think it's one of those situations where it's a part of the solution, but we need to be realistic about how big of a part of the solution it is. And I mean, I think a clear indicator of that is if you were to convert every single piece of packaging right now that you could to compostable or biodegradable, that was functionally purposed. Because you've got to remember, it can't be moist, it can't be hot, there's lots of things you can't do with that type of packaging format. And so if you were to convert all of that packaging right now in Australia, you would only be talking about 3 to maybe 5% of the entire packaging stream. So that's your starting point. So if you're only talking about that as being that much of the solution, then you've got to say, well, that part of that solution is also going to be very nuanced, and it's going to be, in those areas where it's going to work well with organics, because you can't compost something unless you've got organics. And then you've got the issue of, if you have a ton of compostable packaging here, you had better have 10 tons of organics over there to mix it with. And so we've got, our conversation and our advice around compostable and biodegradable is it's part of the solution, but it's a nuanced part of that solution, and we need to work through that and apply that with that in mind. We also need to consider and remember the waste hierarchy, and that is it's right down here on the waste hierarchy. So if you've got people talking to you and you haven't had a conversation about avoidance, reduction, reuse or recyclability, then don't be talking about compostable or biodegradable, because it's further down the waste hierarchy for a reason. And I think it's really hard right now because consumers see it as a bit of a trendy kind of silver bullet solution. The reality is that it's not. And we're trying to do some work in the packaging covenant to reposition that and to get people having a more sensible idea of what's the right purpose and what's the right fit for compostable and biodegradable. And there are some things where it's really great to use those materials in those packaging formats, but they are very limited. So, and I think that's some of the issues that you see even with the European application of it as well.
Brooke, is there a global appetite to reduce the biodegradable time period from 90 days down to 20 days from?
Yeah, it's really hard to say, because it's not just about the time period, it's actually about the contamination that it's creating. So because you can't tell the difference between a biodegradable container, and you can't tell the difference between that and a non-biodegradable container, and the added complexity that this one is biodegradable only in industrial composting or biodegradability, and then you've got your home one. You've got people who think, well, if I put it on my composting at home, I'm going to come back in 6 months and not have a coffee cup, and they've still got a coffee cup, and then they're like, well, this doesn't work. So they lose faith in that alternative, and so you've got this added complexity of that as well. And then if you can't tell the difference from compostable to non-compostable, and they're both going through the MRF at the same time, you've then just contaminated, say, a PET stream or something else, with the compostable material that has just actually degraded the materiality issue.
And possibly inhibited the microbial action.
That's exactly right. And so it kind of all falls apart very quickly.
Yeah.
I'll ask Keith. Although I was going to give Anthony, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not on composting, no.
Thank you.
Anthony, you listed for us a whole range of paper associations joined together to provide a great document in terms of handling paper. Were you able to discern the secret of getting all those associations together that would put aside their commercialities and decide to work together to make sure how we could get the best information and do things collaboratively?
That sounds like a comment, Keith.
I hope you're able to discern that and be able to reply.
I tell you what, if you've got the answer to that, you shouldn't be sitting up here, you should be out working that.
Well, I think there's some degree there's materials competing against each other. Everyone's talking about plastics being bad, everyone going to paper. Sometimes people say paper's bad because of water usage or whatever. I think they just try and maybe get together, but it also might have been because different nations had organisations. So Belgium might have had the forestry people, and then Germany had the de-inkability people, and then Bulgaria had the adhesive association. So I would have thought that there's a geographical aspect there as well, that they become their own specialists in their own areas, and that then they start talking to each other and come together.
You just need to be more collaborative.
You mentioned Germany was leading the way in surge separation. First question A, is that funded through the government? And B, I'm hoping there is a high clean streams of waste coming through. So what happens to those waste streams after they're collected? Are they reprocessed locally to close the loop? Are they going somewhere else? And is there anything that we can learn from what happens after the collection? Any advanced technologies or other things that we can leverage? Because it seems we're a bit lagging in that space locally.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. There's separation still going on because some materials are still commingled. Just there is more separation. So you've still got a MRF doing its work. But for instance, if the paper is being picked up, that'll go through and it might still be separating out the contamination, but it won't be going through with all the plastic and glass in the first place. There's an extended producer responsibility program that sort of looks at where the funding comes towards subsidising that program. But there's still, in Germany, for instance, there's 4 compliance schemes, whereas some countries only have a single scheme in terms of where this runs. There's a big competition in Germany about how you sort of work out who you're going to sort of fund and then how they fund or contract in terms of collections. So it's a very formalised program. You would have a cleaner stream and you would still have markets, but I think that the whole China crisis has impacted Europe just as, but there was discussion that last week about how Australia's probably been worst hit because we're relying so much on the China market for an outlet of mixed paper. And so that, whereas in Germany there might have been more local use of those materials that could accommodate that rather than having to send it to China or India.
It's a much bigger economy.
Yeah, bigger economy, Paul just said then, about
Just a little.
to about to absorb the materials, but by having it clean in the first place makes a big difference.
I think we might have time for just one very quick one if there is. Otherwise, I don't want to stand between you and your bio break. Oh, we have one. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, Brooke.
Hey, Rob.
Anthony. I guess what I'm interested in is traditionally some of the European countries have had quite a well-integrated approach, and I'm thinking more of Germany, the Benelux countries, Austria, Scandinavian countries, where they've looked at waste to energy and recycling. But are there particular standouts in terms of some of the advanced technologies, such as pyrolysis, chemical recycling approaches, and actually sort of, did you see, I guess, on your trip, those approaches moving forward?
I think what stood out for me was that the conversation is part of the conversation, that people are willing, that obviously it's part, there's a social license to operate when you start to talk about the alternative energies and waste energy, etc., all those kind of things. And that social license to operate doesn't exist freely here in Australia as it does in Europe, and I mean that's widely acknowledged. But I think that's why when we talk about the work that we do, we don't take that off the table as part of the conversation, because we need to have that conversation here in Australia, and we need that to be part of understanding what all the potential solutions are here. And I think you're right, you know, that's part of the circular economy transition, is understanding how the different parts integrate and connect in together. I don't think we're not, you know, that advanced in understanding that broader picture right now. And I mean, I think the packaging space and the various organisations that are in it are actually are doing some of the most advanced work in trying to understand that. And I think the transition to the circular economy and the work that we're doing here is important, and it's getting us to the place where we can be comfortable to have those conversations. But they're definitely something that we need to do here in Australia. And I think you're right, there are examples of, but I think it's also, again, I think it's a little bit about like the compostability and biodegradability space. You know, it's going to be the right fit for the right problem, you know, and it's really understanding what that solution is, because, you know, we're also very conscious of the fact that we are different to Europe in one very big way. We have a very large country with very small pockets of highly densely populated populations, and we have the tyranny of distance, and that does make it more difficult for us to pick up and apply some of the European learnings here, there, because we simply just don't have the volume that, you know, you would have in some European you know, vicinities and geographies as well. But I definitely think it's part of the conversation and something we need to think about when we're talking or thinking about an integrated approach over the coming years for the circular economic solutions that we need here in Australia.
Just my response there, Rob. I went to an excellent seminar run by the Chartered Institute of Waste Managers in London, and there was a panel discussion there talking about this thing about chemical recycling. One of the guys was on the panel, and he was saying you probably need about 400,000 tonnes per annum to make it viable for the one they were talking about setting up. But there's a level of, and okay, UK's a bigger market than Australia, but that was discussed. But it wasn't being discussed in an overly positive way, because other people on the panel were talking about the capacity to have mechanical systems, recover a lot of materials. Even in Australia recently, last 6 months, as we know, we've had 2 facilities set up, one in Adelaide, one in Melbourne. We can now process more than 50% of the mixed plastics that was previously going overseas. Approximately, right? You can do about 110,000 tonnes per annum now, whereas 6 months ago we could do 0. So we've got that capacity now in Australia. Now, so if you're talking about bringing in a PREP, like this is your speciality, I would have thought that a PREP is always going to win out and take a lot of the materials, even at a sort of a secondary MRF and a beneficiation of mixed plastics. You can do so much more before bringing in chemical recycling, and this was the panel. And they got to the point of saying, yeah, we're going to struggle. If we're going to get 400,000 tonnes, we're going to have to pinch the mixed plastics rigid. We're going to have to pull materials off that could have been recycled somewhere else, but we're going to need to get those materials in to get our minimum feed every year to feed the thing.
I think Anthony makes a good point, because this is the important thing about, we've got to have the conversation. We need to understand the alternatives and the opportunities, but we also need to understand that a circular economy transition and moving towards a circular economy is about maximising the utilisation of resources again and again and again. And once you burn that, you're going to have to dig another hole to get more material to go back and start that loop again. So any of these kind of conversations have got to be had in that context of what is it that we're actually trying to drive, and how are we utilising materials, and how are we maximising that. And if putting them, into waste to energy is ending that cycle, is that the best use for those resources in the longer term? And it may also be part of a conversation, is that a transition? Is that part of a transition model? As you transition to a circular economy, is this one of the solutions that we need to consider to get us to where we are then able to reuse or recycle all materials or compost them? So it's important to be part of the conversation, but it's also important to remember the overarching sustainability objective here and the circular objective, which is we want to keep using these materials and reusing them again and again in that loop and through the circular economy, because we want to maximise the utilisation. We don't want to stop that. So, there's no easy answer to this area.
Howie, you can be the last thing.
I shouldn't ask a question. How have they bridged moving, like talking circular economy and like pyrolysis and so on? Are they looking at other sectors as well? Because it's just packaging. There's heaps of other sectors.
Yeah.
Are they looking across all of those?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's probably where here in Australia, I would dare to say that packaging is one of the most advanced circular economy sectors in Australia, whereas Europe is much more broadly across a lot more than just packaging. Yeah.
Thank you very much.